Welcome to Spotlight. I'm Rian Keating. Today we're delighted to have the opportunity to interview George Rose, who's currently starring on Broadway at the Brooks Atkinson in the revival of Aren't We All? Mr. Rose, welcome.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to meet you. I've admired your work for so long.
That's very kind of you.
When you first read Aren't We All, what were your first impressions of it?
I thought it was a very frail little piece, but like most plays of its period, very well crafted, and I felt that there was only one way to do it, and that would be to get an absolutely first-rate cast together. A cast of a great style and great sophistication, because I think if you're going to create that period of 1923, when there was a great deal of style and sophistication around, that was really the only way you could bring the play to life. And I think I was right, because I think the casting here is far superior to the cast that appeared in London. Both was Rex and Claudia did it in London, as you know, but I think they've been much cleverer here about supporting cast, and I think we pulled it off because the audiences are enjoying it enormously. And what they're enjoying, I think, is a recreation of a style that is elegant and accurate and amusing.
One thing Claudette Colbert had said in an interview, she was almost ready to pull out at the last moment when they were doing it in London because she was afraid she might have to take a back seat to one of the other performers. Have you had a problem with egos, or do you all work well together?
No, because I think problems only occur with second-raters, and there are no second-raters in this cast. The temperamental ones are usually the people who have the artistic temperament but not the art.
Well, that makes a good deal of sense. As you had said, this play is, well, it's 62 years old now. How do you feel it holds up in the 1980s?
Well, it appears to be holding up extremely well, because the audience rocks with laughter, and the sense of enjoyment and expectation from the time the curtain goes up is intense. I must confess to being rather surprised by it, but it obviously was something that people were feeling a great need for. And I think it's precisely that. I think it's witty and elegant and light. And it's about witty and elegant and sophisticated people. And I don't think there are too many of those around anymore. I mean, one can shout four-letter words and take one's clothes off, but one can't be very witty or elegant or sophisticated.
No,
it's a kind of reverse puritanism we're in at the moment, isn't it?
You had originally wanted to be a cathedral organist, if I'm not mistaken.
I wanted to be a musician and an organist, and indeed I studied piano and organ up until the time Hitler marched into Poland, when the government had other plans for me. But indirectly I became an actor because I was a musician, because a notice went up in the school where I was studying saying that Tyrone Guthrie wanted offstage singers for a performance of Peer Gynt at the New Theatre in London. And I went along, claimed to be a singer, and got a job. And once I was on the stage with Laurence Olivier and Ralph Richardson, Sybil Thorndike, people of that caliber, I very soon became interested in acting, and eventually asked Laurence Olivier if he would give me a letter of recommendation to his old school, the Central School. And he very kindly did so, and they gave me a scholarship for a year, so I switched from music to acting. But my musical education has always been of the greatest help to me. For instance, I was able to go into musicals and read music. And there aren't too many actors around these days because I don't think anybody learns an instrument anymore unless they learn 3 chords on a guitar, which is very helpful outside a certain type of music.
You had an affinity for Fats Waller as well, I believe.
How did you know that?
Well, I do my homework.
Well, Waller was indeed one of my favourite pianists, and still is. In fact, I still sometimes put on some Waller to play. I was always attracted to jazz very strongly, and I still listen to it. But I didn't have large enough hands to play the kind of music that Waller played.
Speaking of jazz, you're going to be working with Cleo Lane this summer.
Yes.
In the park, so could you elaborate a little on that?
Well, it's interesting, and I've known Cleo for a long, long time, but we've never worked together, and indeed I never, in my wildest dreams, thought that I'd share a stage with Cleo. I also admire her husband, John Dankworth, a great deal, who is a marvellous instrumentalist and a first-rate arranger, and indeed, before I came to America back in the 50s, I used to dance to the Dankworth band when Cleo was the band vocalist, before they were married. And I'm delighted that she's going to do it, because she's an awfully good actress as well.
Oh, absolutely.
And apart from the fact that she I've already done a rehearsal with her back in February this year, I think, when she flew in from London, and we did a stage rehearsal of the whole show. And she just arrived with all her arrangements. John had done all her arrangements in the right key, and she just went up on the stage and gave a performance. And Wilford Leach, who was directing it, turned to me and said, "It makes a difference when you get someone who knows how to do it, doesn't it?"
Oh, I'm sure.
I thought, yes. I thought, yes, it certainly does. Now, I'm delighted to be working with her, and I think the show is absolutely fascinating. I think Rupert Holmes has written some quite marvellous music. And music that, I know this is a really hoary old cliche, but people will go out of the theatre humming some of Rupert's tunes. I find myself humming them now, even just working on the script. He's a marvellous gift for melody, quite extraordinary.
He's also a wonderful lyricist.
Yes, he writes marvellous lyrics, and he's done an incredibly good adaptation of Dickens' novel, which, you know, is an unfinished novel. So each night, the audience votes on the various possibilities of the ending. And according to the way the audience votes, the show changes. The show changes dramatically and musically. So we all have to learn about 53 endings.
Now, as actors, how difficult do you think that's going to be?
Well, it's been very cleverly done, and the burden of learning the variations has been split among the cast. The variations are organised according to the vote, so that each actor is primed so that if he is chosen, he knows precisely what he has to do. So you don't have to learn all the variations, you only learn your own variations. If you happen to be voted either the murderer or you happen to be voted one of the couple for the happy ending duet at the end. So the audience, it's really an audience participation show. I'm very much looking forward to doing it. I think it's going to be tremendous fun.
Which role will you be playing?
I'm playing the chairman of the music hall. The whole thing is set in a music hall, you see, with chairman in the 19th century. But for the purposes of doing it in the open air, the music hall company has come down to the end of a pier at an English seaside resort and is doing the show as a seaside performance in a pier pavilion at the end of the pier, which works awfully well in Central Park because that has a kind of open air summer quality to it. So I have to organise all the voting. It's a rather long part, but he also has to play one of the comedy roles because somebody's got drunk and hasn't shown up, which makes him very angry. So he has a couple of numbers as one of the characters in the show, the comedy characters.
Well, it should be just delightful.
I think it's got great possibilities, and it's witty and tuneful and interesting in a very unusual way, in that it does take a mystery and ask an audience to help develop the ending and the denouement, because, as you know, Dickens didn't live to finish it.
You had once said, when I have a stage to go on, it's like putting a fish in water.
Did I say that? I think that it sounds a bit pretentious, but I think it's true. And I think it's true of many actors who, like myself, have spent a long time in the theatre. We feel safer on a stage than we do at home, because there are no accidents in the theatre. You play the play, and someone may forget a few words, or a lamp may fall over, or someone may have a fit in the audience, but usually that doesn't happen. So once the curtain goes up, you feel, well, here we go. Nothing dreadful can happen for the next 2 hours. It is an area of safety, an area in which it eventually becomes comforting.
You had said earlier that you had worked first with Ralph Richardson and Laurence Olivier. At that time, did you take it for granted that you were that successful? Because I'm sure there were many.
Well, I wasn't successful. I was a walk-on.
But just to be the lowest,
that was pure luck. I went along and posed as a singer, and because I could read music and had a kind of loud baritone voice, I convinced him that it was pure fraud. And once I was in the company, Guthrie was the kind of director who didn't permit anyone to loiter in the wings. If he wanted some extra bodies on the stage, he didn't care whether you were singers or dancers or who you were. He said, "You over there, we can use you. You're a likely young lad." He said, "Come and be a lunatic as well as a singer in Peer Gynt. Now you can be a Moroccan slave, and now you can be a guest at the wedding, and now you can be a bit of the great Boyd."
How would you compare him with the directors of today?
For me, there is no comparison. I've never worked with a director who had the wonderful sense of fun, mixed with a very academic and serious knowledge of the plays, but once he got you in rehearsals, you wanted to go to a Guthrie rehearsal because you spent a lot of your time rocking with laughter, because he was a very amusing and witty and a man without any respect for stars, which was not awfully nice if you were a star, because you suddenly found yourself deflated by I once heard him say to a very famous actress, "You're a silly, floppy woman, and you better go for a walk round the park until you come to your senses." Well, of course, she didn't like that at all. I once heard him say to her, call Ralph Richardson Mary Tempest, because Ralph was looking for a light, and he thought he showed more light than he'd got, and so he began looking for the light instead of playing the scene, and Guthrie was furious and said, "Get on with the show. When you need to have some light, I'll see that you get it." And Ralph came down to the footlights and said, "Look here, old boy, don't call me a bloody fool in front of the company, old boy." And Guthrie said, "Oh, Mary Tempest," which Mary Tempest was a famous comedienne of the 19th century who was well known for looking for her spotlight, you see. And I don't think Ralph ever forgave him, but if you were a junior member of the company, to see an international star taken down a few pegs like that was extremely amusing.
Well, I'm sure it's a wonderful.
And I saw it happen to a number of very, very famous actors, because I worked with Guthrie. I did about 3 productions with Guthrie: Peer Gynt, Cyrano de Bergerac, and Henry VIII at Stratford, and he was equally cutting. He was not scared of stars at all, and I think eventually stars appreciated it, because when you get to a certain point, directors don't really like to criticize you, and you can if actors do need to be told sometimes that their mannerisms are getting the better of them. We've seen something before. It's very tempting, if you've made a success, to try and repeat it, and it takes a great deal of self-discipline not to repeat it. So sometimes a director like Guthrie will come in and say, "We've seen all that old rubbish before, so don't bring it out again. Find a new performance, for God's sake." And he would say things like that to a star. I thought he was a wonderful director, and I don't know anyone who could handle a crowd on the stage as Guthrie. Absolutely authentic.
Well, I'm sure.
And make you inventive. He would take a group of people who were members of the company, some in the lower orders of the company, very inexperienced, and he, in some strange kind of magic, he would make you invent, so that you invented a character, so that each tiny person in the play became very real and very individual on the stage. And then, if he would encourage you to invent until you reached a certain peak where you went over, and then he'd say, no, that's enough of that, you've gone too far now. But he was enormously encouraging to me, and I suppose I liked him because he liked me. He used to encourage me to do all sorts of outrageous things on the stage and then cut me back, which was wonderful for a young actor, because you were stretched, and then suddenly you were shown the limits in no uncertain terms.
You would also work with Noel Coward at the Haymarket.
Yes, I did a revival. It was interesting to work with Noel, and because it was the first time he'd been directed by another director for something like a quarter of a century. Because he'd always directed himself in plays written for himself. So I did a play by George Bernard Shaw called The Apple Cart with him. And I think if you said to me, what particular experience in your 41 years as an actor would you like to live again? And I would say I'd like my 3 months with Coward at Haymarket, because he was a man of such exquisite kindness and humour. Another man who made me laugh a great deal, and always with tremendous concern and loyalty for people that he liked. For instance, he always came to see me. I wasn't playing a very large part in the show. I suppose it was, a reasonably good-sized part. I was on stage most of the time. But he always, after that production of The Apple Cart, always came backstage to see me. Whenever he came to see a show I was in, he'd always come back, which I thought was it was very endearing. I always felt that his liking of my work was not just a flash in the pan, that he genuinely appreciated what I did.
What a lovely gesture.
Yeah, he also could be extremely cutting. I remember once he was working with a great friend of mine, an actress, and I said, "How's the play going?" He'd come to see me in a review in the play, and he said, It was going beautifully well. He said, and he mentioned her name. He said, she's a great friend of yours, isn't she? I said, yes, she is. He said, she's a very good actress, but if you let her, she will build a tiny nest in your hair. And it was a very truthful comment. This lady was, still is, rather enthusiastic. Mm-hmm. And he thought she was being just a little bit too pushy. But he appreciated her very much. She gave wonderful performance in the play, I might tell you. But he was a young man who was enormously amusing, enormously kind, enormously loyal.
You would come to this country with A Man for All Seasons, which I believe when you first came here you thought would run just a few months. But
well, that wasn't the first time I came. I originally played it in 1946. Mm-hmm. This was my third visit in Man for All Seasons. It was kind of third time lucky. I didn't think it would be lucky. I thought, it was an English historical drama, rather remote, I thought, for American audiences, but I was very wrong. I thought we'll play for 3 months and about 5,000 people will come 10 times. It'll be that kind of show. Mm-hmm. But I played it eventually for about 2 years.
Why do you think it was so successful here?
I think it's, as so often, as like Aren't We All at the moment, without realizing it, it was something that an audience very much needed at that particular point. And actors look at a play and they read it and they think, oh, well, I don't know, is this really very commercial? Does this have much of an audience? And suddenly, it reaches a whole group of people that have been longing to go to the theatre and haven't gone because there was nothing they wanted to see. Mm-hmm. And suddenly that audience starts lining up at the box office. I get calls all the time for seats for Aren't We All? People that I know don't go to the theatre very often will call me up and say, can you get me house seats?
Why do you suppose there's such a dry spell of good material?
I think a lot of it is economical. I think a lot of it, I hate to say this as we're on television, I think a lot of it is because it is due to the impoverished and stunted quality of television fare, and I think that produces a lack of imagination in the public, a lack of sophistication, a lack of literacy. Mm-hmm. I don't think people can sit and listen to good writing anymore, or even know what good writing is. I think that many authors, unless they're very careful, particularly authors from the past, are using a vocabulary that is much greater than the majority of people would use today. I think television has a lot to do with that.
I think you're right. It seems, well, I think education also has a lot to do with it.
Yes, but I think television doesn't help education in any way. Certainly, that may be a rather sweeping statement. Maybe television doesn't help the use of language. I think people are less articulate.
Well, I think you get very lazy watching television.
Well, if you watch it, you will notice there's no set in this apartment. Said he very smugly. I don't really enjoy it. It's another thing that I don't really like very much. I don't mind being on it, but I don't really want to sit and watch it too much.
No, I would tend to agree with you there. How do you find young actors today in terms of training? Do you find that it's as solid as it was in your day?
No, I don't. I am always being congratulated on it, and this is disturbing to me. I'm always, often being congratulated on my audibility. They say, well, whenever you come on, we can always hear you. I said, well, that's what I'm there for. There is no point in my going on the spot of the stage. If I'm not audible, if you can't hear me, what is the point? I might as well stay home. And I don't think these basic techniques are sufficiently taught in drama schools. Mm-hmm. They seem to be scared of something, and I think it all comes from this boring nonsense with the Stanislavski and the Moscow Arts Theatre, an absurd anachronism if ever there was one. When you think of the Moscow Arts Theatre peacefully lying down alongside the Lenin era, the Stalin era, a dictatorship of such blood-stained and ghastly quality, what sort of theatre, if it was any good, could possibly have existed under that kind of regime? But it did, and for some reason or other, I think due to people who are constantly looking for a promised land, where Soviet Russia became that in the 30s, and I think that is still very much in evidence in some of the teaching, which of course is absolute nonsense. But nobody says you've got to be audible. Everybody says, oh, you mustn't give a student result direction. Well, if results are not what you're after, what the hell are you doing there anyhow? And I think that the basic training, it's like scales. If you're going to play the piano, you've got to do. These things are muscular. They've got nothing to do with psychotherapy.
Exactly.
Nothing to do with self-reference. Are you going in for sense memory? Are you remembering the afternoon your mother shut you in a closet if you want to find some anger? And also, I think cameras had a great deal to do with it. I think self-reference is often the only aid you have if you're in a movie studio or a television studio with a close-up lens on you. What else can you do? You can't refer to anything except yourself. So occasionally I think that is very valid to go back into one's own pathology and find something that looks effective, but it is not the only truth there is. There are all kinds of truths. And the fact that it may feel very real to you because you are exploring your own pathology doesn't mean that it's going to be real to someone else. I think there needs to be a great deal of sorting out, but I do wish people would produce their voices. It's very interesting that there are three people and I'm very proud of this. There are three actors in Aren't We All who went to the same school. Lynn Redgrave, Jenna Brett, and myself. Mm-hmm. And say what you like about our performances, but we are audible.
That you are.
Because the Central School of Speech and Drama produced good diaphragms, strong the tongue and lip muscles. How otherwise could I have done the Major General's song?
We talked about
Pirates of Penzance, which was a direct result of my training at that school.
We talked about Elsie Fogarty and her chicken bones.
Well, that was the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. Elsie Fogarty was originally a speech therapist, mm-hmm. and she was the originator of many forms of therapy for people who had speech impediments. In fact, when Edward VIII, or the Prince of Wales, who would have been Edward VIII, abdicated for the love of Mrs. Simpson, and the crown went to his brother, mm-hmm. George VI. George VI had a rather bad stammer, and Elsie Fogarty was summoned to the palace to deal with the king's stammer, because it was one of the most obvious drawbacks for someone in that position to have an impediment of any kind. And she managed to produce an almost impeccable form of speech. So she was a quite brilliant old lady, and one of the things she used to give us to do was that we had a chicken bone, a piece of chicken bone, which was shaped like a Y at each end, and it fitted over the teeth, over the top set and the bottom set. And it had a piece of cotton through the middle, and you put the cotton around your neck so that you couldn't have an accident by swallowing the bone. And it forced the jaws apart, and you would do exercises. I think we usually work for about 10 or 15 minutes a day just doing exercises with the bone prop, and it strengthened the tongue muscles and the lip muscles. But I don't see anyone going in for this kind of solid, practical technique. Mm-hmm. And I think it's absolutely necessary. One of the problems in the theatre nowadays is you can't sell the cheap seats because they're too far away. Now, when I used to go to the theatre as a kid, I used to sit in the balcony the whole time. And I never felt deprived because the actors at that period were vocally so firm, and they knew about vocal acting, so you knew orally mm-hmm. what you were supposed to know. The fact that you couldn't see real tears streaming down someone's face didn't worry you, because the voice told you of the anguish and the despair or the laughter or whatever. And that kind of strong vocal technique seems to have disappeared. Everybody, there are some brilliant actors around that I've worked with, but there is a tendency still, I think, in drama schools to mistake pathological fantasy for reality. And it doesn't tell the story. It introduces a lack of focus into the telling of the story. And I think the telling of the story is what an audience wants.
Well, it's really that simple.
It's really that simple, but as I say, the therapists have got into it and obscured the issues to a quite alarming degree.
Mm-hmm. You've also done many musicals, and you had once said in an interview that when you hear the orchestra warming up, you get such a sense of occasion.
think it's even more than that. I think, you see, as one gets older and one acquires a technique, I think one becomes, in a way, proud of what one can do.
Mm-hmm.
And to work in a musical, to work with dancers who have very firm techniques, I mean, you either have the extension or you don't. As a musician, you can either play the notes as you can't, or you can't. As a singer, you can either get those notes or you can't get them. These are muscular, physical accomplishments. So when I'm with people that have achieved that sort of physical accomplishment, I feel happier because those kind of techniques are what really interest me. It's not what I can feel, it's what I can convince an audience that I'm feeling. That's what the whole thing is about, isn't it? Really? And also, I think that having been, when I was younger, thrown into a review by the scruff of my neck and having to work as a review performer, as a review comedian for 2 years, I think learning to go on the stage on your own with just a band and to hold an audience is something that everyone should know about. I think review is the most difficult and fiendish form of entertainment ever invented, but I think it's probably the best training. And I'm disappointed that there aren't more reviews on stage. I think the review format is a marvelous format. I prefer it to, in fact, to a book musical, because I think very often book musicals, it's difficult not to get bogged down in certain stretches of the book. But it's rather like review. It really depends on running order. You know, review depends on running order. If you have an absolutely marvelous number and it follows 2 fairly good numbers, you won't have a marvelous number anymore because the audience anticipation, the audience involvement has dropped because you've only had 2 fair numbers. If you have 2 good numbers and then you have a marvelous number, you will have an even more marvelous number because the audience is up where you want them. Do you understand what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think musicals are like that. If you have the right piece, following the right song, following the right dance number, construction. As Alan Lerner says, a musical is never finished. And I think it's true. And that's what I like being a performer. And I think if you said to me, what are you proud of? I would say the fact that I have been out on stage in front of a Broadway chorus, who are the greatest dancers in the world, and that I've been able to get away with it is something that I think I'm more proud of than what's called the legitimate theatre.
George, our time is up.
Well, it's been nice talking to you.
Thanks so much for having us over.
Yeah,
it's a pleasure.
Come again.
Thank you. This is Rian Keating, and you've been watching Spotlight. Our guest today has been George Rose of Aren't We All? If you have any comments or suggestions, or if you would like to receive our program guide, you can write to myself in care of Pierrot Productions, 640 10th Avenue, New York, New York, 10036. Spotlight airs Tuesday evenings at 8:30 on Channel D, Saturday mornings at 11:30 on Channel C, and again Wednesday mornings at 1 a.m. on Channel C. Until next week, this is Rian Keating. Have a good week. Thanks so much.